Okay, so today is the 3rd of Heshvan, 781. Last week, we left off discussing the Heilig beliefs, or what we mean when we say Heilig versus psychic and somatic, according to Gnostic metaphysics, which seemed to a certain degree to correspond to our concepts of Nefesh, Neshama, Ruach. So let me just, because this part of the philosopher's answer can be a bit complicated, because there's a lot of philosophical terms that Rabbi Yehuda Levi is trusting we already understand and know, because we've learned Rambam, we've learned Gemara, we know what's going on in the world, we understand our own way of our own conception of the universe. So when we're presented with the philosophers' positions, we know where we differ. But unfortunately, I'm not so lucky when it comes to what's going on in the universe or these parts of Mishneh Torah, unfortunately. So I want to preemptively apologize for the little bit of the sluggishness we might encounter in this section specifically, because I'm not even sure I understand it in the English entirely. So, okay.
I don't know up from down, so.
I think the philosopher's question, is there an up and a down? So let's see here. Let me just recap. Last class, we were talking, okay, that's right. The divine light that enters into a person's being, their psyche, once they have completed themselves in their deeds and in their thoughts. They become what the Kuzari calls hashalem, someone who's complete, someone who's whole. So also they have like a serenity about them. They have shalom, so to speak. This person is yedabek. They connect, they cleave to this Elohi Or, this divine light that becomes they themselves, meaning they and the divine light are indistinguishable from one another. It's no longer something that's external, it's something that's a part of them. And Mark pointed out last week, my problem was that the philosopher doesn't seem to pick a lane. On the one hand, he says that God doesn't even know who you are, that let alone hear your prayers and your thoughts. And then my problem was how all of a sudden is a person who completes themselves connected to this Elohi Or, where Mark pointed out, it's not that God suddenly takes interest. It's that this person has achieved the summit all by themselves and now can see very clearly, whereas this God of the Greeks, of the philosophers, is still indifferent and cold. There's no connection with this divinity, so to speak, but just with this Or that emanates from divinity. Something like that. Did I miss anything? Does anyone have any questions on that or anything else we covered last week before we move on to this next section? Oh, Tamir, it looks like you're saying something. You're on mute.
I'm not talking to you.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay. I know I'm not. I know I'm muted because
Okay.
I didn't want the background noise to bother you.
Gotcha. Okay. So then let me put on our next section. Let me see here. Let me just share the screen. Everyone can see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. I can see you. Perfect. Now let me just go to, we're on paragraph 15. If you're following along in the Feldheim edition translated by Rabbi Korabkin. And if you're following along with the page, I'll get us there soon enough. Okay. I did want to, maybe before we continue a little bit further, because there's something that the philosopher is going to say that I'm having trouble understanding, but I see parallels to Maimonidean thought and in other places in the Gemara and in the Mishneh Torah, but let's cross that bridge when we get there. Anything else I want to cover before we go on? No lunch. Somatic. Okay. Just to cover the 3 levels of the soul before we move on, because we're going to talk about soul and how the soul develops. In the Greek conception, you have a concept called hylomorphism. Hylomorphism, it's a compound of the Greek word hylik, which is a very material existence, and morphism meaning form, meaning that the form itself is a base low level of existence. That's what is called in Greek the somatic existence. The somatic existence is all material. There's no higher intellectual capability in something that's somatic. It seems that the Greek has his worldview also includes people as being somatic. Certain people from certain countries, if you remember, we covered, he had a racist opinion on people from Africa. Specifically, I don't know if he mentioned somebody else, just them. Yeah. Or he uses them as an example. There could be others that are solely somatic and that they can't have any sort of connection to this divine light. Then you have something called the pneumatic. The pneumatic existence is a body that has a intellectual connection, has an intellectual soul in it. And the psychic level is just a purely immaterial existence. It's what this active intellect is. This active intellect is a purely psychic existence. It doesn't exist within a body, which is why people are able to connect to it from all over the universe, I'm assuming. Okay. Now, let's move on to our next paragraph here. Just to recap where we're reaching here, he's talking about that when a person gets to this level of being shalem, and their active intellect takes over in all of their, not only in their thoughts, but in their physical actions as well. And this level leads them to doing only good things. They don't sin anymore, basically. They only do good things. And his soul, in the words of the Kuzari, the nafsho mitahara min hasefekot uvina hukmot al amitatam, that his soul becomes purified, or his nefesh becomes tahor, purified from any sort of doubt, and he understands things clearly with true wisdom. And this is this person living in this very elevated state. The Kuzari continues. Right here, let me just move the box here because I can see you, but I can't see the screen. Okay. The Kuzari continues here. He says, "Betashuv ki'ilu hi malach, betashuv gam bamidah hamalachutit hatachtona nifkedet min hagufot." One's soul becomes like an angel, a malach. And in this instance, the translation is a little imprecise, because it doesn't say that, if you notice, it doesn't say the nefesh or the neshama or anything like that. He just says, "Betashuv kilu hi malach," that it becomes like a malach. What I think he's referring to here is the psyche of the person. The psychic part of the person becomes like an angel, becomes like this divine being, so to speak. And it acquires the lowest level within this class of divine beings. That's what we mean by Hamalachutit. Hamalachutit is an angelhood, if you will. It's outside of peoplehood. You're in a different class altogether. And you're the lowest level of that now. You reach the highest level of humanity by getting to this perfected state, this complete state. But there's still so much out there beyond this the human experience. So even once we get to this place of completion, we're still not, even though we're connected with divine intellect, the active intellect, we're still not we're still humans at the end of the day. Yoram, please go ahead. And Yoram, then Eleanor.
Well, angels are wonderful, except they couldn't do the Torah because the Torah deals a lot with our body needs, and the angels don't have free will. So it's not like you go up, 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 and then you become an angel.
Uh-huh.
It's fundamentally different creation of Hashem.
Mm-hmm.
One is like robots. You program them, and they do a task that Hashem lets them or asks them to do. We have a free will to do or not do certain things. We know what Hashem wants us to do, and if we are not sure, we ask a rabbi, and we choose to join your class today or not join your class, join the Shacharit prayer or not. So I don't know if you go up, 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 you become a tzaddik gamur in my view, but you can't be an angel unless you at that point lose your free will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm not so sure that our Greek philosopher is concerned with free will. And there are certain Greek philosophers who have the idea that free will is an illusion based off of your perception of time and reality. Right?
And
That's
this paragraph is the Greek philosopher. It's not talking about Jewish philosophy.
correct. Exactly.
So,
Jewish
although your
philosophy,
point may be
yeah.
accurate, Yoram, it's not quite relevant to this paragraph.
No, you're
But
right,
there-
Mark.
But Yoram does bring up a good point about perfection. I don't like the word of completion. I'm trying to find Harambam in the Mishneh Torah. You may remember in our Yesodei HaTorah class we did last year,
Let's go back
we
to
talked about the Talmid Chacham, not even the Talmid Chachamim, but the Chacham themselves, the rabbi themselves, that a Chacham has to be Ke'ilu Malach. He has to be like an angel in his actions, in his presentation. And the Rambam is very harsh. I'm trying to find it. I'm in the section here on Hachamim, who, while they're doing things that everyone else may be doing and that are mutar, or permitted, there's nothing wrong with what they're doing legally or halachically, that their actions are inappropriate for their level of knowledge, their level of who they are, by dint of who they are. And the idea of what I'm trying to, and I could be conflating what the Greek is thinking and what the Hachamim say, because even though it's similar, there is a conflation. And when the Greek says that the person's soul becomes like a neshama, or becomes like a malach, what does he mean by that? And is it our same conception of malach? And that's something that I will become clearer as we progress into the Muslim, the Christian, and finally the Jew when the king has a chance to speak with the Jew. Eleanor, your hand was up, and then Tamir.
Would you review and explain again about the three concepts of the soul in the Jewish philosophy, nefesh, neshama, and I don't remember the third.
Ruach.
Ruach.
So we see these three terms in Bereshith, in the very first parasha of the Torah. There are different conceptions of which one is lower, which one is higher. So I don't think I'm going to tell this is the highest, this is the lowest, because there are different opinions. And there are one that I like the best, but there are different ones. But I'll just go in order of how we see it in Bereshith. The first thing we see in Bereshith is that when God is creating the world, we see there's a ruach Elohim mechafefet al pnei hamayim, and there is a breath of God, a spirit of God, a wind of God that is fluttering above the waters. This is ruach. This is what gives existence its ability to exist. This would be in seemingly, if we wanted to make parallels to the Greek, it doesn't exactly do a great parallel, but it seems to be it's the somatic level. It's existence. It's where existence springs forth from. It's the atmosphere in which existence can exist. Next, we see when the man is created, when Adam is created, it says, "V'yiser Adonai Elohim et Adam, afar min ha'adama, v'yipach ba'apav nishmat hayim, v'hi Adam lenefesh haya." That God formed the man from the dirt, from the dust of the dirt, and he blew into his nostrils nishmat hayim, the nishama of life, the breath of life, the soul of life. Vahi Adam lenefesh haya, and Adam became a living breath, a living soul, a living person. Nefesh is often thought about as being the physical existence of something. And the ruach is what animates that physical existence, and the neshama being the spiritual, intellectual connection that we are, who we are as people. If you notice in the Kuzari, I don't think the Greek has used the term neshama. He's only used the word nefesh and ruach. I'm pretty sure, I'm 90% sure. I wish I had Control F on my book so I could find it really quickly, but no. But I'm pretty sure that he's only used ruach, meaning the animus, if you will, and the nefesh, meaning the person themselves. Now, nefesh and neshama are related to our breathing. An inhale and an exhale. One's internal, that we internalize, and something else that we put out. So it seems that the neshama is the nishma, something you breathe in, and the nefesh is something you exhale, nipush. What that's going to mean for us on a mystical level, I think will be explained later on in the Kuzari. And I think we'll even see parallels in the Greek's thinking, but I don't think he's going to get that specific about the somatic, the pneumatic and the psychic. But the pneumatic is the spirit that's dwelling within the material. The pneumatic seems to be this life force that animates things. But in the Jewish mindset, those are the three basic. There are other levels that are discussed in Hasidic and Kabbalistic literature. We see in the Zohar and even in the Guide for Perplexed. But those are the basic three that we are usually seeing. Does that answer? Does that help? Okay. Tamir, please.
Okay, I was just wanting to emphasize that what Yoram was discussing previously is this concept of what is angelic, or what are angels about. Here, I think they're making a clear distinction about, they're looking at angels as ideal states, that man can achieve an angelic or an ideal state, whereas Judaism classically doesn't talk about angels in that term. Only God is an ideal state. Angels are messengers. They do the bidding of God. They don't have free will, but that's a Judaic thing. This is in Greek philosophy, and an angel is a perfect being, which is really different.
And we're going to get into something. Thank you, Tamir. There's going to be an interesting point that the Greek philosopher is going to bring up that does have a nice parallel to the Mishneh Torah, and I want to share it when we get there. I won't share the screen because it's one line. It's not worth sharing a whole screen, but it might be actually. Okay, but let's move on. Are there any other thoughts, questions? Okay, great. I mean, not great, because I have a million questions, but okay, whatever. Let's see. Okay, so we're talking about this soul that becomes like an angel, and it acquires the lowest level within the class of angels, and then the Kuzari continues with this is the level of the inactive intellect, or the passive intellect. No, I'm sorry. This is the level of the active. Sechel poel, excuse me, is the active intellect. V'hu malach madregato lemata min hamalach mune megagal hayareach. Okay, now this is a big thing here, and he uses the same words as Rambam. He says that this lower level of class of angels, which grants one the sense of being not trapped in the body, he's talking about the psychic level now, being incorporeal. The psychic level of the soul is the highest level in the Greek conception, and it is something that is inbound by material constraints. He then goes on to say one is then on the level of the active intellect. So the active intellect is that high level for us, but it's the lowest level. It's just below an angel whose level, it's just below the angel who oversees the moon. Okay. Now, this is very interesting to me. Anyway, first, before I share what my thought here, does anyone have any questions on what that means?
I think you went over something rather quickly that I think you should have, I'm more interested in.
Okay.
And it's in the English translation. I don't know where you addressed it in Hebrew.
Mhm.
One is then on the level which grants one a sense of being incorporeal.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the incorporeal? That's the lowest level of the angel per this active intellect.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be, here's my question. In Judaism, that's being incorporeal is when you, through whatever mechanism, get in touch with your soul as beyond just your physical body. Question mark.
Question mark. Say it again one more time, just so I make sure I understand.
Okay. This incorporeal, my pronunciation, I can't speak English. This incorporeal here is talking about the lowest level of the active intellect just being below the angel.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes. Just being below the angel of the moon.
Yeah, right. In Judaism, incorporeal, it's above the physical body. It's above the intellect even, and it's somehow reaching the neshama, the soul, that's somewhere above your physical body.
Right. So I would actually, no, actually not exactly. In Judaism, incorporeality isn't really our goal. There's a concept in, you can see it in Hasidus, and I think Chabad Hasidus talks about it specifically about making a dira b'tachtonim, making a dwelling place for the divine in the physical realm.
Right.
And we see that over and over again with our how our mitzvot are symbolic of, especially with the Mikdash and the Mishkan, the what do you call it in English, the tabernacle. But more so than just these physical representations or symbolic representations, the human being themselves is a great example of that in the second chapter, where they're made from the dirt, the dust. God creates them, forms them from dirt, and then blows ruach, and then blows nishmat hayim into them, thus combining the incorporeal with the physical. Whereas every other creation, the animals, the trees, they weren't formed from dirt. They were and snapped into being. At least that's the conception we have in the words themselves. So God could have also snapped people into being, and they could have been an emanation, a direct emanation from God's thought or God's words. But God decided here to be yitzir, to form and shape from dirt, a low level, the domim, the thing that doesn't have nefesh, and to put a nefesh in it. So in the Jewish, I would think, I could be wrong, I'm not an expert. It seems to me in the Jewish conception, engaging in the physical is our way of elevating the world. Whereas in other processes, and it seems even here with the Greek, disengagement from the world and moving beyond it is the holiness of, or not even the holiness, the greatness of a person, the completeness of a person. They've left behind the somatic being. They've left behind even the pneumatic being and become purely psychic.
Maybe more accurately, Judaism is being aware of
Mm-hmm.
the divinity rather than trying to get beyond the earth. I mean, there's some incorporeality in Judaism.
Right.
And maybe rather than being beyond, following what you were saying, it's being aware of God, basically.
Mm-hmm. It's being aware of God. It's bringing it into our lives. And there is a very fine, unlike other approaches to God,
You're not a chassid.
I think Judaism favors a balanced approach. I don't think that's actually halacha. We favor a balanced approach. We have what's called the sfil hazahav, the golden path, and any sort of extreme piety is very much frowned upon. Extreme piety, we don't see people who are extremely pious as extremely pious. Of course, if they are, it's always a very private piety that we admire. People who are inwardly pious rather than externally pious. An example of this, I think this relates to it. A friend of mine told me recently a story about a Buddhist monk who decided that his hand was, I could be butchering the story. The important part I remember is that he wanted to give something up for God. So he decided he was going to put his right arm in the air and never use it again. And so within a year, he never used it and the arm atrophied and shriveled away, which is wow, that's amazing. It's the willpower it takes to not engage in this physical, moving his arm, and it withered away. Where that doesn't, it's missing the point of what Kedusha is, though. Kedusha, and this, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I think it's worth saying. Kedusha isn't a material like other things. You have water, you have earth. You don't have a material called Kedusha. Kedusha is a sense that happens once you recognize the unique quality of something. It's often translated as being separating, but it's not only the action of separating. God separates the mayim lemayim, and it doesn't make water kodesh. It just makes it separate. Their essences are different. The ones that are in the heavens and the ones that are on the earth. The Kedusha is recognizing an inherent uniqueness about something and then celebrating that uniqueness. So when we say Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, Melech Haaretz Kebodom, that holy, holy, holy is Adonai our God, we're not saying that he is so unique, so unique, so unique. But at the same time, the whole earth is still full of the glory. He's separate and close. Whereas in the Greek concept, Kadosh, 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 God doesn't even hear you. So why are you praying? What are you trying to do? Who are you trying to impress? There's no connection you can possibly have. So here, to get back to our section here, when he says, it grants someone a sense of being incorporeal, when the soul reaches this level, this means that I think what the philosopher is saying is that this person's able to forget the simple pleasures of earth. They don't have to have chocolate cake. They don't have to have a comfy bed. They sleep on the floor. They can put their arm up in the air and it can wither away and it won't bother them because they're not so connected to the arm. They care about their spiritual well-being, their nirvana, and we see this also in. I went into this last night. There's a difference in conception of the active intellect between Aristotelian Maimonideans. I'll erase the Aristotelian. Between Maimonideans and Aristotelian Islamic philosophers. like Everos, he thinks that the active intellect is an escape from the world, and that we should strive to get into that active intellect in order that we should escape. Whereas Rambam says the active intellect allows us to receive nevuah, prophecy, which then allows us to engage the world and improve it. And we're going to see in a few weeks when we get to the parasha of Va'era. No, not Va'era. Where's Sulam Yaakov? Vayetze. When we get to Vayetze, thank you. When we get to Vayetze, we're going to see Yaakov is going to go to a place called that he calls Beth El. They call Sha'ar Hashemayim, which is in, I don't want to get into a parasha, darasha, but it's in opposition to what we see in this week's parasha with Babel. Babel, for us, we make fun of the Babylonians. The Torah is making fun of them. We call it being min Babel, that they're speaking nonsense. But in the Babylonian mindset, Babel is Babel, it's the gate of God. And they think that their tower is everything, is there, the pinnacle, and Nimrod, the king, he has direct access to God. And they build a literal tower of vertical society where you have this hierarchy of a tyrant ruling over all these little, plebeian peoples. Whereas Yaakov, he goes to Beth El, and he says, Zeh Sha'ar Hashemayim, this is the gate of God. And what he witnesses is a sulam, a ladder, a staircase reaching up into the heavens. And he sees angels ascending and then descending. And there's a lot of commentators who say, why are the angels ascending and then descending? Shouldn't it be angels are descending and then ascending? Because they're from Shemayim. Angels are from another plane. So Rambam explains that the angels in this dream, at least in his explanation, I'm not sure if it's pshat, but in his explanation, he says this is a metaphor for the prophets. The prophets are the Malach Adonai. They are the messengers of God. And the way they are able to be a Malach is that they complete and they work on themselves and they perfect themselves. They become philosophers and they understand the secrets of the universe and they ascend up into heaven, but they come back down in order to be engaged in the physical world, in order to tell people you're doing this and God wants you to do this and to help correct problems. They could escape, but they don't. They stay tethered to the physical. So here he's saying that it grants a sense of being incorporeal. This is the ascending the sulam. They understand that there's something beyond themselves. And that's the level of active intellect. That's what he's saying here. Not that one actually dissipates and becomes Dr. Manhattan, if anyone's a Watchmen comic book fan, where they're beyond their body and they can just teleport everywhere in the universe. No, they're still physical, but they know what it's like to be incorporeal. So they're not so much concerned about the physical world anymore. Does that help answer? Does that clarify?
That last sentence was the Jewish one, not the Greek one.
Yes, these are the
Yeah,
Jewish.
got it.
All right. Yoram and then Anne?
Well, I want to go back for a couple of seconds to the Kedusha or sanctifying, because you said a couple of things that are not exactly the same. You said in the creation, you separate water from land, but it doesn't give it the
Water from
whole
water.
great. The first time I believe there was a Kedusha is separating the Shabbat from the other days.
Mhm.
They could look to the unobservant person as identical. I go shopping, I do this, I do that, but God clearly put it a special energy to make it very, fundamentally different, if you believe, than the other days. Also in space, there are places, I think with Moses, he went to a place that looks same as any other place, except he said, oh, you are now standing on a holy place. So obviously from the divine, you get extra energy to make one place more holy than a regular place. Kodesh HaKodashim, nobody can get in except the Kohen Gadol. So there you die. If you go in, you die. And I don't know how the Greeks viewed it, if at all, in giving space or activity a special energy for
Mhm.
whatever reason.
I'm not sure. That's a good point. What you say is absolutely correct. With regards to Shabbat, God is Mikadsho Shabbat. He sanctifies the Shabbat. He is telling us that he is putting Shabbat as part of the creative function, creative. It's part and parcel of the fabric of the universe, if you will. Meaning that a person, Shabbat isn't just like an optional day. It's an important part of our identity as Jews, and also to a certain extent as our identity as people. We're not just meant to work, we're meant to rest. But it's more than just resting, like taking a nap or just not working. Shabbat also has a psychological element, a dimension to it. Not everybody is commanded in that. That's a special thing, an extra thing that a person should endeavor to engage in Shabbat, to contemplate the Maaseh Bereshit, the creation and the worlds. But you're absolutely right. God separates Shabbat and makes it holy. But like I said, when he separates the waters, that's not a holy endeavor. The waters are still, the separation at this point isn't in order to distinguish the essence of one from another. It's just to distinguish them physically, which isn't an act of kedusha. With regard to Har
Mathematics, you
Sinai,
say separation is necessary, but not sufficient condition. Because without separation, how can you say one day is holier than another? It had to have a beginning, like you know what time it starts, you know
Right.
what time it ends. So that's a separation in time.
right?
There could be separation in space, that a particular part of the planet is designated as a holy place, and it can't lightly go and stand there without consequences.
Right. That's why I'm not saying only separation, but I'm using it as a function of the English word unique, to recognize the unique quality of something. When you separate whites from darks in your laundry, you're not sanctifying the laundry, you're just separating them physically. But when I have a favorite chair, lahavdil, that I sit in, I choose that chair and I recognize the unique comforts of that chair and I celebrate the unique comforts by choosing that chair. That's in a very mundane way of putting it, like similar to how a process of Kedusha works. With regards to Har Sinai, the mountain was only holy in the moments that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was descendant on Har Sinai. It's not a holy place today. We don't make pilgrimage to Har Sinai, we don't know where it is. It's only holy by dint of what it was function was for us at that time, at that place, both with the burning bush and then later with the revelation, the theophany. Anne, you had a question?
Yes, it goes back to what you were talking about with the Babylonian idea of the angels going up and down the stairs.
Mhm.
Does this correlate at all to Jacob's visitation by the angels going up and down the ladder?
Absolutely. So I might have accidentally said Babylonian concept. It's really our concept, the Torah concept of going up and down.
Okay,
But our concept in Jacob's ladder is to be a distinct experience than what we see in this week's parsha with the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is a very selfish way of ascending up to heaven. It's at the expense of other people's lives, and their whole idea is to ascend to heaven, make war on God, and then they become God. Whereas
right.
with our ascending to heaven, the Sulam Yaakov, the Jacob's ladder, it's ascending, then descending to be involved in worldly matters, to bring divinity down into the world.
Is this the point where Jacob really becomes more holy than he was? He wasn't such a nice person before that. And from this point on, he becomes really a good person.
I think it's a good, it's a point of it's a redemptive point for him for sure. I do think that Yaakov was doing the best he could with what he had. There are definitely some things that he could have done better, but it's definitely a turning point. Yeah, that's a good insight. I've never thought of it that way. He does have a turning point at this point, but there are still like questionable things that he does later on, and that's okay. We see that our patriarchs and matriarchs, they were normal human beings. They weren't larger than life saints. They were just like you and me, to a certain degree. Okay, let's now. I do want to point this out. It's probably I might be the only one who's interested in it, but when he says that the angel that the active intellect is just the angel that is beneath the angel that controls or watches over the moon, that struck a very interesting point for me. And like the thing is I do recognize that the Kuzari is scripting the Greeks' positions. He's choosing the Greeks' positions and presenting to us the way he wants us to see them, knowing what we know in the Mishnah Torah and in the Talmud and our perception of things. But he says here that there's I just want to highlight it because it's very interesting to me. Is this the highlighter? Yeah. Let me just move the box here. והוא מלך מגרתו למטה מן המלך ממונה בגלגל הירח. Galgal is another term for the systematic workings of the universe. There's different levels of Galgalim in the Mishnah Torah. The Rambam mentions 10 levels of Galgalim. They're usually referred to as the 10 levels of angels. It's trickier when we use the English Christian concepts because they have so much embedded in them when we talk about angels. But in Harambam's conception, he says that there are Galgalim and that there are specific, they're called different things. We call them Shamayim, we call them Raki'ah, the firmament, heavens. There's different words that we use for that. But this is very interesting for me. He says Galgal hakarov mimenu. The Galgal, I'll use the term angel just for usage's sake, but know that it's not exactly a great translation. Galgal shebo hakarov, hakarov mimenu. Galgal hakarov mimenu. Hu galgal hayareach. The Galgal that is closest to us is the Galgal of the Yareach. There's two ways of understanding this. We can understand it metaphysically, or we can understand it as being a function of our universe. In terms of the Galgalim that he talks about the next one is going to be the Kochav, the sun, or the stars in general. Yes, the moon is closer to us than the stars, physically speaking. But are we talking about a metaphysical way of understanding the world, or a semiological way of understanding the world? Now, my opinion is that anything Harambam presents to us is not a physical way of understanding things, or should I say a metaphysical way, but rather a semiological way of understanding the world. And that's right. Who was the angel in It's a Wonderful Life? His name was, it wasn't Gabriel, was it? His name was Clarence. I guess maybe he's the Galgal Hamkarov Mimenu, at least in that point in time. But the physical, and this is probably going to be a topic for another class. In the Hebrew conception of word, in the Hebrew mindset, our lexical understanding of the word devar means not only word, but it means thing as well. And this has a parallel in the Greek term logos. Logos means the word, and there's a very famous opening of a gospel where there's a very back and forth. The logos was with God and God was with the logos, etc. But at a certain point in time, there was something called the splitting of the logos, where the Greeks developed a different word for thing, and thing and word got separated in Greek epistemology, in their mindset. But in the Hebrew mindset, davar means both thing and word still. So when I say that Judaism views things in a semiological fashion, it means that we view the world in terms of being the speech of God. And the speech of God then creates things. This is what we say when we say in the morning prayer, saying, Baruch Shema Rabbi Haolam, he spoke and the world comes into being, or he renews the creation each and every day. It's the speech of God. Now that's going to be, I think, a whole other topic that we're going to approach at a later time. But what I wanted to point out here is that it seems that with the Greek, and this might be a good place, it's not a great place to end, but I think we have to end. The Greek is saying that the intellect of the person that reaches this certain level, they become this divine being. They're connecting to a divine being, and they're just below the angel who watches the moon. But it seems that in Rambam's conception, when he says Gagal Hakarov Mimenu, he's just saying the thing that's closest to us physically in the universe outside of the earth and the Nikia is the moon. How we relate to that in a spiritual fashion, in a spiritual manner, I'm not sure. But I would like to see where the philosopher goes with this next. You know what? If it's okay with everybody, let's just finish the paragraph in English, just so we can get to the end of a paragraph. It's nice to finish one paragraph at least. It's right till right here. We'll just go ahead and go for it. It says, the angels are completely devoid of physicality and have always been this way. They also live eternally and thus never have to fear destruction. It therefore follows that anybody who has become one with the active intellect likewise never has to fear destruction. It is very comforting to know that one is in the same group as Hermes, Asclepius, what do we call him in the Hebrew? Asclepius, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. If one reaches this level, then he and they and everyone else who reaches that level become a single everlasting unit. He's talking about the world to come, or the world after death. That when a person reaches active intellect, they have found salvation, so to speak. They have created something beyond themselves that's going to last when their physical body disappears. So the obsession, I wouldn't say obsession, the desire with connecting with something beyond the physical is to ensure that the person exists eternally, and that it's not a guarantee that when you die, maybe you're gone. Your physical self is gone, and since you live a somatic life, your soul also destructs because nothing was reached. In the Greek concept here, you reach this level of, let's call it nirvana, let's call it heaven. You then become part of this greater collective of the active intellect, since you become one with the active intellect, and you live on, in a sense, forever. Eleanor, you had your hand up. Oh, you're on mute. Go ahead. Take yourself off mute.
Sorry. I wanted to talk about child labor.
Okay.
Recently, I've been reading about families who the children are not able to go to school now because of the pandemic, and the families have almost no money. And so the children are put to hard labor, physical labor. And I was thinking about families like these, and the concept of separating the holy from the worldly, and how I think it is possible. I don't know. I think it is possible for people who are in extreme poverty, who know very little about any philosophy of any kind. I still think it's possible for them to make choices and do things that maybe separate in some way the holy from the worldly, possibly sharing small amounts of food with others. I don't know. I just wonder, do you have to be so knowledgeable and so understanding of philosophy in order to experience what we're talking about?
I think in the Greek conception, of course, poor people, they don't get to enjoy it. Like people who are uneducated, they're below us. But in the but in the Jewish conception, 100%. The Torah was given at a national level. Not only does it show us the binding on everybody, but it shows us the importance of the klal, of every single person involved in the Jewish nation, from Moshe Rabbeinu to the lowest water carrier, quote unquote lowest water carrier, that there's an equal share in this potential, that the world is what it means by Kol Yisrael yesh chelek le'olam haba, that there is a universality to our ability to tap into this. And you don't have to be some great philosopher. It's nice to be. Rambam really does think that people should strive and learn, and that's what he says, that Talmud Torah is so important to the Jewish nation because it helps us raise ourselves anyway. But even if you don't have time to learn 9 hours a day, and you can only learn so much, or not at all, you still have some sort of, you're still part. You're not thrown out like in the Greek conception. Tamir.
Yeah, I would say that this underscores or emphasizes a huge difference between Greek philosophy and also Christianity and Jewish philosophy. The point of the Greeks and the Christians is to achieve an ideal state, an incorporeal state, and the ideals in Judaism is to achieve a higher state in this world, in the corporeal world where our existence is. The emphasis is all upon what you do and elevating your spirit, but not to become incorporeal, but to do stuff here. And it's a real huge distinction here. And the Greek philosophy just kind of led the Christians in a in a direction of heaven is the ideal, angelic existence is the ideal. It's perfect. The getting away from from the somatic entirely that's all Christian and not Jewish at all.
Absolutely.
So big distinction there.
Absolutely. And I mean, Christianity owes much of its original language was Greek. So I mean, Aramaic and Hebrew you could argue, but it really, once it became a Christian, a non-Jewish entity, its original language was Greek. And much of the concepts we find in Christianity today that are at odds with Judaism find their origins in those philosophies.
Right.
Yoram.
I don't remember the source of it, but in the Jewish, either if it's not Talmud, it's definitely in the Kabbalah. You talk about the desire to go from mochin de katnut to mochin de gadlut. And for Mark, who'd ask me what does it mean in English, it's from low level of consciousness, katan. Moach is brain, is consciousness of brain, to gadlut, which is a higher big. I don't know if it's about Shem Tov or where is it coming from, but clearly there is a strive to go from the lower level of consciousness. When everything bothers you, you get angry on everything. You don't have gratitude, to a higher level. Elinor, that you don't need to be a Talmud scholar to have gratitude, to act with kindness, to be patient. You don't need 10 years of Talmudic yeshiva studies. Just come to our Talmud class, you'll get there in no time.
Right. Absolutely. No, I'm not sure if that appears either. It could appear in the Kabbalah. I'll look into it. But it's a very good point. And the thing with Greek philosophy is that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are many good points that the philosophers make. We have to know what to accept and what to reject. And that's the tricky part. I think that's why the Chachamim just say, why learn Greek philosophy? Just learn our stuff, because it's the same thing, except ours is more according with us. Go ahead, Mark.
This seems to say that if you've got the active intellect, you get to go to the world to come.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Whereas ours is almost everybody's eventually going to get to the world to come. Mm-hmm. It's just how long you got to spend, at least in the Hasidic, it's just how long you got to spend in Galut or whatever it is. Not Galut.
In the Gehenna.
Gehenna, thank you. This is saying only those that have the active intellect get to what I'm calling their version of the world to come.
Right. And you notice it's not a function of reward and punishment. because why would God reward and punish if he doesn't even know or care who you are? It's a function of your efforts here. And we do see a little bit of this concept in Maimonidean thought. And when Rabbi Angel, in the previous book, he was describing Maimonidean heaven as the idea of graduate school. You have to graduate from university and then you can apply to graduate school. You can't just go straight to graduate school. You have to do the work first. But it's still a function of God's judgment at the end of the day. God's still going to sit and judge and decide whether your book of Sefer Hayim, Sefer Hamet, Bar Minan, but it's a function of judgment. We're here, it's not a function of any judgment, it's your own effort, and not everybody gets to be a part of it. It's an exclusive club of existence that really not everyone's even welcome to, because some people don't even have the ability to have these thoughts or have the intellectual capability to do such a thing. And it's really exclusive. It's a very wide ivory tower heaven. Okay. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns, complaints before we close out the day or the class? We went over again this week, so I apologize, but I think it was worth it. I think it was worth it to do so.
What's going over? How long does the class supposedly go?
I'm trying to aim for 45 minutes, but
Oh, I thought it was an hour. Okay.
We went over a few minutes, but it was worth it.
Last time when I did the Mishnah Torah class, I was also aiming for 30 minutes, but it ended up being an hour. So we might end up being an hour anyways.
This was good. Thank you.
It was worth
This was real
running
good.
over for.
Thank you, Yosef.
Of course. My pleasure.